Hey everybody, welcome to It's Just Food with Mike. I'm Mike. Today I have a viewer request video. Yeah, that made sense. Meatloaf. I didn't learn to make this in culinary school. They didn't teach us this at the CIA. They didn't teach us that working in a 5-star platinum club. I didn't grow up around people that really knew how to cook very well and didn't learn how to make meatloaf until much later on in life. This was a variation of my wife's recipe. I tried hers one time and I was like, that's good meatloaf. So I'm going to share with you what I do with this and see how simple it is to take it to that next level with just a couple key ingredients. So stick around. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with your friends. Share it with a family member that you like, or if you hate the video, send it to somebody you hate. Either way, anything would be helpful. So stick around and we'll show you how to get this done. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to cook these onions, but I grate them first before I cook them off. You don't want to put raw onion into a meatloaf because it really won't cook. I've seen people do that before, and it's like crunchy, and it tastes just like a raw onion. So I grate mine, and then I will saute it in a little bit of butter. If you want something that's going to make you cry, nothing worse than grating onions. I'm going to tell you right now. Take it from me. So this will go in my compost pile. So about one onion, small onion, or a half of a large onion. We want to try to get some of this water out of this too, and that's also why I cook it in butter. So don't be afraid of using butter. And we're going to add a little bit of garlic to this too before we're done. But anytime you're cooking with onions, you want to almost always want to do them first. This is definitely one of those times. This is just a sweat. We're not trying to get color on these, but if you get a little color, it's not going to hurt it. That's just more flavor. Just cook that down a little bit. Low heat. And then, let me clean this up. With the garlic, I'm going to use a microplane because I don't want any chunks of garlic in there, although I love garlic. I'm going to put it right on top of the onion. Like I said, we're not trying to get color on this. We just want to cook it off. We want to get it cooked so that it's not raw before it goes into the oven, because it will not cook. Because we're only going to take the meatloaf to about 155 degrees. That way I know it's safe and it's cooked. If you take it more than that, it can get a little dry. It'll be fully cooked, but we don't want dry meatloaf. Nothing worse than that. I can tell you when I was at Paris Island, they fed us meatloaf at almost every dinner serving or service, and never really found a good meatloaf until my wife made this for me, and I changed it slightly to make it so that I really like it, with a couple little additions. Okay, so now we've got that garlic in there. Let this cook a little bit. Then we're going to let it cool before we try to mix it in. So we got a little color on the onion. It's not a problem. That's going to just add a little bit more flavor to it. Okay, so now we're going to assemble or put together the meatloaf itself. It's 1 pound of ground pork, 1 pound of ground beef, and I use 80-20. If you go leaner than that, it can be dry. That's another reason why I use the pork. This keeps it really moist. 80-20 is what I usually buy for everything that I use, whether I'm doing burgers or meatloaf, meatballs, anything like that. 80-20 is what I use. Ground chuck if I can find it. And this is that. So I've got 3/4 cups, and I'm going to put all this in the description below, the amounts. 3/4 cup of seasoned breadcrumbs. These happen to be panko. It doesn't really matter what you use. So 3/4 cup there. 3/4 cup of buttermilk. That's one change I made. My wife's original recipe was milk. I changed it to buttermilk. A little bit different flavor. I've got 3 eggs beaten already, okay? They're already beaten. You'll find it's kind of difficult to incorporate the eggs fully if you don't beat them prior to putting them in there. This is another change, I use smoked paprika. I use a teaspoon and a half of smoked paprika. This stuff is awesome. I love smoked paprika. If you haven't tried it, give it a shot. Okay? And her recipe called for 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning. I don't have Italian seasoning. I couldn't find any Italian seasoning. So I'm using a half a teaspoon of oregano and a half a teaspoon of basil. This is another change. I use chili sauce. I use 1 tablespoon of chili sauce. You can use ketchup if you don't have chili sauce. This isn't spicy. It's just a little bit different than ketchup. It's a little bit zestier than ketchup. Boom, in it goes. I use 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce. Tablespoon of that. I need 1 teaspoon of salt. And a good amount of cracked black pepper. I like fresh ground black pepper. And then we just get our hands dirty. Oh, the onion goes in too. I cooled it down a little bit on this plate. I spread it out. It cools quicker that way. You can see it got a little bit of color and it cooks down a lot. So that all goes in, and then we get our hands dirty. Mix it up a little bit with this, and then I'm going to use my hands because it works better. And I'm going to put this into a loaf pan and let it sit for a few minutes to let that breadcrumb absorb all that, because that breadcrumb is the binder. And that's going to kind of hold all of this liquid together with the meat. Nothing works better than your hands. So we get in there, mix it all up really good. Should be one nice emulsification almost. You want to totally incorporate it in there. Mix it in there. Before I put it in the loaf pan, I should say, is when I let it kind of sit for a few minutes to let that all absorb. It's kind of like when you're making bread. You want to let everything sit for a few minutes when you incorporate it initially to let it hydrate the flour. It's kind of the same thing here with the breadcrumbs, especially considering that it's panko on this one. Like I said, you can use either one, but I usually let it sit for a few minutes and just let it chill. And I'll come back in a few minutes and we'll put it in the loaf pan and get it in the oven. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes. We're gonna put this into the pan. We're gonna try to get it as tight in here as I can. This is a bread pan, obviously, but it's a loaf pan. And I like to put it in the pan with sharp edges, because with those sharp edges, you get a little bit of crispiness on the corners, and that's flavor. So in it goes, and I press it down as much as I can. I want to get it into those corners. All of that in there. Try to get it all the same height, obviously. If you've ever made meatloaf, you don't want uneven meatloaf. We want it to cook evenly. You know, I never learned to make meatloaf when I was at culinary school. That was not one of the things on the curriculum. Okay, and the perfectionist that I am, I have to get this to all the edges that I can. Okay, onto a sheet tray, 350-degree oven for 40 minutes. Okay, so I want to make a glaze for my meatloaf here real quick. All it is 1 cup, and again, I'll put all this into the description below. 1 cup of ketchup, any kind, doesn't matter. a 1/4 cup apple cider vinegar, 3/4 cup of brown sugar, then a splash, if I can find it, I just put it in here, a splash of Worcestershire, about that much, and then whatever hot sauce you want to use, again, about a splash of it. I'm using sriracha, you can use whatever. Bring it up to a boil so to dissolve that sugar, and that's going to go on our meatloaf here in a few minutes. When it comes out of the oven, we're going to flip it over and expose the part that's in the pan. You'll see what I do with it. This will go on it. Yeah, we're just going to take this and get this going to dissolve all the sugar. All right, well, it's been 40 minutes. I'm going to pull out this meatloaf, and I'm going to flip it over and show you how that's done. Now, on this sheet tray, I have a Silpat. What I do is I take a good-sized spatula, and I just kind of loosen the sides here. This is a non-stick bread pan, but I just still do this just in case. Now I get a big plate. I get a platter, actually. This one might work. My cupboard's a mess. Don't look at that. Got all kinds of things up there. Get a plate and a towel. This is how people get burned. So don't do it the way I'm doing it. Just like that. Okay. Now, take this off of here. Be careful because it will be hot. See, like that's what the meatloaf looked like when I was a kid. Gray, ugly, not very appealing. We're going to put this back onto the sheet tray. And then we're going to glaze it with our, basically a barbecue sauce, but with our glaze mixture here. Then it'll go back in the oven for at least 20 minutes. And I'm making mashed potatoes to go with it. I'll show you that too. It's my world famous. I say world famous. It's really just my wife's family and everybody that eats it that likes it. It's about as simple a recipe as there is. We glaze this up. And I might do a couple coatings. I'm going to take a look at this in about 10 minutes and see if it's crisping up at all. This kind of makes it. And again, I told you it was going to be crispy on the points here. So I set that here. This goes back in the oven for at least 20 minutes and maybe a little bit longer. I'll take a check of the temp in a little bit here and see where we're at. All right, so I've got a bunch of potatoes here that I've boiled until they were fork tender. I'm going to drain them real quick. I'm going to put them right back into the same pan. And here, I want to get the water out. So I'm going to put them back on a burner. And I'm going to stir them just to cook off as much water as I can. I'm not mashing them really yet. They're going to fall apart. I'll try to get this in there so you can see. Okay. I just want to cook off that water. You can hear the sizzle. That's what we want to hear. Not trying to get color on these. We're just trying to get the water off as much as we can. If you don't get the water off, it gets starchy and kind of gummy. We don't want that. So now I've melted a stick of butter into about a pint of heavy cream. And I'm going to keep this heat on this. Pour about half the mixture in and start getting all mashy with it. We want this to stay hot while we do this, or else it won't come out right. It'll, again, you let too much moisture or you let it get warm, or cold rather, it'll get gummy. That's why I keep it on the heat while I do this. Add a little bit more. Probably won't use all of that. I usually don't use it all. Now you want to be careful here because we are working over heat, and if this gets on you, it'll burn you pretty good. Okay, turn the heat off for a second. Now I've got my mixture here of salt and pepper. It's 1 part white pepper to 7 parts kosher salt. We season it well. At this point, I've turned the heat off. That's the consistency I'm looking for right there, to where it kind of plops. You know what mashed potatoes look like. These are Idaho potatoes. Don't use waxy potatoes like Yukon Golds for this, because it just doesn't work. You want a dry potato like an Idaho or a russet, which is the same thing. You could also use the red potatoes for this. Every time there's a holiday, a little more salt, I have to make this for everybody because they want it. My wife's family grew up eating boxed potatoes, and I'm like, what are you doing, people? I had to make this the first time I ever met them, and now every time after that, I've got to make them for them. But you see how simple that is. Heavy cream and butter with salt and pepper and potatoes. Okay, so here's our meatloaf. All right, there. I'll try to center it for you. There's our meatloaf. I temped it. It was 160 degrees, so it's, right there where we want it to be, 155, 165. Totally cooked all the way through. We don't want to touch this for at least 15 minutes. So I'm going to let it sit. What that'll do is help it really kind of hold its form a little bit better. If you try to cut right into this, all the juices will just pour right out of it. It's kind of like cutting open a steak, although it's not steak, obviously. Same kind of principle there. You want to let it rest. So we're just going to let it sit here for about 15 minutes, come back, cut it, and we'll serve it. Okay, so now we're plating. We got our world famous in my family mashed potatoes. I never give enough potatoes to people. They're always like, can I get more potatoes? It's not even the key part of this dish. Mashed potatoes first. Then we cut into this meatloaf. See how it holds together now? I let it sit. Look at that. Look at that. Perfect. Okay, that goes on. I'm just going to do one to show you, really. Give a couple pieces. This stuff is so good. 2, and then I get the veg. I just cooked off some broccoli here real quick. That, and then I always have a little side of that barbecue type sauce, the glaze. They always put a little extra on there. So that's the dish. All right, well, that's the video for you. Again, very simple, awesome tasting. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Share it with your friends. Leave a comment. Remember, this was a comment somebody left for me to make meatloaf. So I'm making meatloaf. Is there anything you want to see? Let me know. And I'll see you all next time. Have an awesome day.